The night sky over Chernobyl wasn't supposed to glow. It was meant to be ordinary, cold, and silent. For most of his career, the Soviet scientist Valery Legasov trusted that silence. Reactors were physics. They were predictable. They didn't surprise you, until the night one of them did. This isn't just the story of an explosion. It's the story of a man caught between loyalty and conscience, and the price he paid for choosing his conscience. The phone rang in the early hours of April 26, 1986. Legasov was at home in Moscow, a respected chemist and a man who believed in structure and order. The voice on the other end was calm, but the message was not. There has been an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. He asked the usual questions about fire and injuries, but the answers were vague, too vague. Before sunrise, he was ordered to fly to the site. He packed quickly, not knowing what he was flying into. No one did. 2 years later, in a dim Moscow apartment, a tape recorder clicked on. Legasov lit a cigarette and leaned toward the microphone. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. He wasn't speaking as a government official, but as a witness. He knew these tapes might never be heard, and that there would be consequences if they were, but he also knew the truth already existed. It had simply been buried. He pressed record and began to unearth it. As his plane descended toward Chernobyl that first morning, he saw the impossible. The reactor building was gone. Smoke rose from a gaping wound of steel and concrete, and flames burned in colors no fire should have. He knew that reactors do not explode. They don't scatter graphite across the ground. They don't open themselves to the sky. But below him, Unit 4 had done exactly that. On the ground, the air tasted metallic and sickening. Helicopters circled the burning crater, while firefighters, unprotected and uninformed, walked through radiation levels that should have killed them within hours. Some were already dying. They just didn't know it yet. Someone kept insisting, the reactor is intact, but the shattered building screamed otherwise. On the tapes, Legasov's voice stays calm as he explains what the design documents never admitted. He described the RBMK reactor, a machine with strengths on paper, but hidden, deadly flaws in reality. It had a design quirk that made it unstable at low power. The control rods, meant to shut it down, actually increased its power for a few fatal seconds upon insertion. He laid out the truth like an equation, a reckless experiment, a flawed design, and a culture terrified of reporting bad news equaled catastrophe. He didn't just blame the operators. He blamed a system that cared more about appearances than physics. Inside the plant, Legasov and the emergency commission stepped over debris that looked like coal. But it wasn't. It was graphite from the reactor core itself. Someone muttered, "Impossible." In that moment, Legasov felt something collapse inside him. If graphite was outside, then the core was open. Radiation was pouring out, unchecked. The radiation meters maxed out instantly, their numbers becoming meaningless. Yet decisions had to be made. Evacuate the city, tell the world, or hide the truth and hope the disaster could be contained before anyone noticed. In the meetings that followed, officials softened the reality with phrases like localized incident and under control. But Legasov had seen the truth with his own eyes. On his recordings, he returns again and again to that crossroads between silence and speech. Warnings about the RBMK reactor's flaws had existed for years, buried in technical memos that no one wanted to escalate. To admit them now would mean admitting years of negligence. To tell the truth meant saying the forbidden, "We built something dangerous." He never raises his voice on the tapes. He just sounds tired, like a man who spent years trying to hold up something that was already broken. In the days after the explosion, Legasov witnessed unbelievable courage. Helicopter pilots flying directly over an exposed, melting core to drop boron and sand. Divers wading through lethally radioactive water to open valves by hand. Miners digging tunnels beneath a collapsing structure with little more than shovels. These men didn't debate or argue. They acted. Legasov realized the truth of Chernobyl had human faces. Firefighters whose skin blistered within hours. Plant workers whose lungs filled with fluid. Engineers who would never leave the hospital. In the conference rooms, officials treated them as numbers, losses, consequences. Legasov knew their names. He spoke of them on his tapes. He remembered meetings where statistics were adjusted to look less catastrophic, and where pressure built to blame operator error to minimize the design flaws. Mistakes had been made in the control room. Yes, but focusing only on those mistakes felt like blaming a spark while ignoring the trail of gasoline that led to it. So he said it plainly: the system built this accident. At the official trial, Legasov gave his expert testimony. He explained the physics, the design, the failed test, and the chain of errors. But he knew the trial wasn't meant to expose systemic flaws. It was meant to isolate the blame. 3 men were sentenced. The state declared the problem solved. As Legasov walked out of the courtroom, he realized that if the truth couldn't survive inside the system, he would have to speak to the future instead. His tapes became his last scientific report, one written not for approval, but for clarity. He recorded late at night. On the tapes, you can hear matches striking and papers shifting. He knew the risks of surveillance. He spoke anyway. He described a nation where the greatest sin wasn't failure, was admitting failure. He didn't call the system evil. He simply said, it is flawed, and if it does not change, it will fail again. As the second anniversary of the disaster approached, the government prepared awards for senior officials. Legasov received none. He was quietly sidelined, his promotions stalled, and he was excluded from key projects. The message was clear: you were useful during the crisis. Now you are inconvenient. The cost of his honesty was isolation. We'll never know everything that went through his mind in those final days. What we do know is that he finished his tapes and left them where they would be found, ensuring the truth existed outside of official documents. Days later, he was gone. His death shook the scientific community. But even then, the government underestimated the power of what he left behind. His tapes spread privately, from engineer to engineer. Slowly, pressure built. Reactor designs were changed. Flaws were corrected. Safety protocols were rewritten. The system didn't change because it wanted to. It changed because one man refused to let the truth disappear. Valery Legasov didn't live to see how far his voice would travel. He never saw his story retold across the world or heard younger generations speak his name with respect. He died caught between the system he served and the truth he could not betray. He wasn't a perfect hero, but in the end, he made a choice few in his position ever do. He chose reality over reputation. Today, the reactor at Chernobyl is silent, sealed under a massive tomb of concrete and steel. But the questions it raised remain alive. How do we build systems that acknowledge their flaws? How do we protect those who bring bad news instead of punishing them? Chernobyl isn't just the story of a reactor that exploded. It's the story of a scientist who saw the ruins, heard the silence, and chose truth over survival. In that choice, Valery Legasov left us a reminder that sometimes the bravest act is to simply say, this is what really happened. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more content like this.